You will wear the grey and be grateful you are let through the doors at all, and if you tear it further, you will answer to me. The words came up the great staircase of Athamore like smoke finding a chimney, low and venomous, meant for one pair of ears and reaching, by ill fortune, another. Lorne, Duke of Athamore, stood in the shadow of the gallery above his own entrance hall, one-gloved Hasting on the cold marble balustrade, and looked down upon the woman who had spoken. She was handsome in the way of a well-set table, arranged, gleaming and cold to the touch. Amber silk, a rope of garnets at the throat, 2 daughters flanking her in rose and primrose like blossoms she had grown for market. And half a pace behind them, where the candlelight thinned and the draught from the door still stirred, stood a third young woman in a gown the colour of a rained-on afternoon. Lorne had built his life upon the reading of faces, and he read hers before he had meant to. The grey gown had been fine once. He could see that even from above, in the good cut of the bodice and the honest fall of the skirt. But it had been let out and taken in by unloving hands, and somewhere near the hem a length of it had been torn clean and pinned back with a mender's carelessness, so that the girl held her fan low against her side to hide the wound in the cloth. She did not weep, she did not plead. She stood very straight beneath the abuse, as though straightness were the last thing she owned outright, and she said, in a voice pitched only for the woman before her, "Then I shall keep to the walls, ma'am, and trouble no one." "See that you do," said the amber woman, and turned away, and the 2 blossoms turned with her, and the girl in grey was left alone at the foot of the Duke's staircase, as though she had been set down there and forgotten like a parcel. He should not have watched her a moment longer. He had learned in 8 hard years the cost of watching women who arrived in his house wanting things. But he watched her lift the tournem an inch, examine the ruin of it without self-pity, let it fall, and square her shoulders to go in, and something in the plainness of that gesture caught at him like a thorn in wool, and would not let go. It was his aunt who broke the spell, as his aunt broke most things by arriving. "There you are skulking like a footpad in your own gallery," said Lady Ottoline Vane, Dowager Marchioness of Brede, arranging her considerable person beside him in a rustle of black bombazine and disapproval. "The whole county is below stairs waiting to be looked at by you, and you stand up here looking at them instead. It will not do, Lorne. You promised me tonight." "I promised you a ball," he said. "I did not promise you a bride." "You promised me in hair before I am dead, which at my age is much the same as tomorrow." She followed the line of his gaze downward, and her eyes, which missed nothing, narrowed. "Ah, you are looking at the Westcotts. A poor place to begin. Hester Westcott has been widowed twice, and is hunting a third, and those 2 peacocks are her whole fortune now. She has dressed them to the teeth and drilled them like dragoons. She means one of them to be your duchess before the candles gutter. And the third." "What third?" "The girl in grey," Lorne said. Behind them, the dowager appeared, and made the small sound she made when a thing was beneath her notice. "Oh, that is the daughter. The first wife's child, Rilla, I think, or some such country name. There is no fortune in that quarter and less prospect. The mother spends what the girl might have had upon those 2. She keeps her about as an upper sort of servant and calls it charity. I am surprised Hester brought her at all." She patted his sleeve with the flat authority of a woman who had buried 3 husbands and outlived their objections. "You will not waste your evening on the poor relation, Lorne. Be seen. Smile at someone with 10,000 a year." "I do not smile," he reminded her. "No," she sighed, "you do not. God knows why any of them come. They came, he knew, for precisely the reason he did not smile. Athamore was the greatest house in 3 counties, and its master was 38, unwed and worth a kingdom, and there was no charm so lacking in a man that his acres could not supply it. They came for the acres. He had learned that lesson once, thoroughly, in a rose garden in the spring of his 30th year, from the lips of a woman he had loved past all sense, a woman who had wept prettily upon his shoulder and sworn she wanted nothing in the world but him, and who had been overheard, not an hour after, laughing to her cousin that Athamore's park was the true jewel and the Duke merely the setting one endured to wear it. He had not married her. He had married nothing since. He had grown, instead, a hard bright shell, and behind it a certainty as fixed as scripture, that a warm face turned up to his own was a shop front, and a woman's tenderness a coin she paid to buy the thing behind him. So he went down into his ball with that certainty buttoned tight across his chest, and he moved through it as a man moves through a field he owns but does not love. The great rooms of Athamore blazed. 1,000 candles doubled themselves in the long mirrors. The orchestra soared at a country dance. The heat of mussed bodies and hot wax lay over everything like a hand. And the faces turned to him as he passed, one after another, each blooming into the same eager arrangement, the tilt, the lashes, the ready laugh, until he could have set his watch by the falseness of it. Mrs. Hester Westcott found him within the quarter hour. He had known she would. Hunting women always found the fox before the fox had finished his cover. She swept up with her 2 daughters in tow and made her curtsy exactly as deep as insolence would allow. "Your Grace does us such honor," she breathed. "You will not remember me, Mrs. Westcott of Marin Cross, but I had the great joy of knowing your late mother, the sweetest woman that ever," but I run on. "May I present my daughters? Cordelia." The rose one dipped. "And Prudence." The primrose one dipped lower and looked up through her lashes in a manner she had plainly practiced at a glass. "They have talked of nothing but Athamore this fortnight." "Have they?" said Lorne. "Cordelia sings," said Mrs. Westcott. "Prudence paints in watercolours quite exquisitely, and both dance beautifully. You must see it for yourself, Your Grace, you simply must." "I do not dance," said Lorne, which was the truth, and watched it fall among them like a drop plate. He had not danced in 8 years. It was known. Half the point of not dancing was that it was known, for a man who did not dance could not be maneuvered to the top of a set beside a girl. Her mother had positioned there like a gun. Mrs. Westcott recovered with the speed of long practice. "Then you must sit and talk with us, and let the young people caper. Cordelia, tell his Grace of your journey. He will be so amused." And it was then, over the mother's amber shoulder, that Lorne saw the girl in grey again. She had done exactly as she had promised. She had kept to the walls. She stood in the embrasure of a far window, half behind the fall of a curtain, holding a glass of ratafia she did not drink and watching the dancers with an expression he could not at first name, until a turn of the figures brought the 2 Westcott daughters onto the floor, laughing, resplendent. And he saw the girl's face follow them, and named it. It was not envy. He had seen envy all his life and knew its sour colour. This was something gentler and far harder to bear. It was gladness worn thin. She was glad in some stubborn corner of herself to see them dance, and beneath the gladness lay a tiredness so complete that it stopped asking anything for itself at all. And Cordelia's voice, "Your Grace, they say, is quite as fine as any you would hear in London," the mother was saying. "Your other daughter does not dance either, I think," Lorne said. The whole party stilled. Cordelia's practiced smile slipped a notch. Prudence's chin came up. "My oh." Mrs. Westcott's laugh was a small hard thing. "Your Grace is too observing. That is Rilla, my late husband's girl. She does not care for company. She is happier at home with her needle, truly she is. We brought her only that she might see a little of the world before." The pause was exquisite. "Before she settles to her situation. She has no accomplishments to speak of, poor creature. You must not regard her. She is not dressed as her sisters are," Lorne observed. The cruelty in his own remark was deliberate. He had laid it down like a card, to see what they would do with it. What they did was worse than he had guessed. Prudence tittered behind her fan. Cordelia looked at her slippers with the small, satisfied, downward smile of a girl who has arranged a thing and is pleased to see it noticed. And the mother said, "Silk over iron. There was a gown made ready for her, Your Grace, a very pretty one. But she is careless, you know, and tore it past all wearing this very afternoon, so that she has only that old grey thing to fall back upon. We were quite in despair. But there, she is used to making do." She turned the full battery of her attention back upon him. "Now, Cordelia was telling you of London." He did not hear another word of London. He was looking at the 2 daughters. At the primrose one's small pleased smile and the rose one's downcast satisfaction, and he was thinking with the cold, clean logic that had made him feared at every table in the county, that a gown does not tear itself past all wearing on the afternoon of the greatest ball of the season. Not on a careful girl who held her fan low all evening to hide the one wound she could not mend. It had been done to her. It had been done by hands that now held painted fans and turned up practiced eyes to him, and it had been done, he did not doubt, in part, so that the plain sister should be no rival in the field, and in part for the plainer pleasure of doing it. He could see the whole small campaign of it, laid out as clear as a map upon a table, a gown promised and a gown withheld. A finer stepdaughter than either true daughter, and so a stepdaughter to be dimmed and diminished and set behind the curtains, lest a duke's roving eye light on the wrong westcott and undo a mother's fortnight of scheming. They had not reckoned that the dimming itself might be the very thing to catch him. Cruelty, Lorne had long observed, was as blind as it was busy. It laboured always to hide the thing most worth the finding. He had spent 8 years believing that women who smiled at him were liars. He had built a whole hard life upon it. And here at last were 2 women smiling at him who truly were, and the strangeness of the moment was not that he had found them out, he found everyone out, but that he could not stop looking past them at the one woman in the room who had not smiled at him at all. "Your Grace," Mrs. Westcott's voice had sharpened, "you seem distracted." "I am attending to my guests," said Lorne, "all of them." He excused himself before she could set the daughters upon him again, and moved off through the crush with the particular grim purpose of a man walking away from a thing he intends to walk straight back toward. He did not go to the girl in grey. He was not such a fool as that. Half the county was watching where the Duke put his feet, and to cross the room to a torn-gowned nobody would set every tongue in Ethelmore alight, and shame her worse than her sisters had. But he took a glass he did not want from a passing tray and drank it slowly by the great fireplace, and from there, unhurried, he watched her. He watched a young buck approach her, some squire's son emboldened by wine, and lean too near, and say something at which she stepped back a clean half-pace and answered with 2 words that sent the boy off redder than he came. She had a way of holding herself that Lorne had seen only in soldiers and in servants of the very best houses, a stillness that gave nothing and asked nothing, a manner of receiving the world's small unkindnesses as one receives the rain, without complaint and without pretending it was fair weather. It was not meekness. He had lived long enough among the meek to know the difference. Meekness bent. This did not bend. It was something rarer, and it troubled him more the longer he looked upon it, because he had come to his ball armoured against every art a woman might use to draw a duke's eye, and had found himself disarmed at last by a woman using none. He watched her set down her untouched glass and gather up a fan an old lady had dropped, and return it, and be thanked and be forgotten. He watched a knot of bright girls near the window glance at her hem and lean their heads together and laugh behind their hands, and he watched her hear it. She heard it, he saw her hear it, and lift her chin the half-inch that was all the answer she would give, and look steadily out at the dark garden beyond the glass, as though somewhere past the candlelight there were a country she meant one day to reach, and at the centre of the far room, radiant, ringed with admirers, stood the acknowledged beauty of the season, Miss Rosanna Kestrel, of whom the whole county had talked for a month, gold-haired and diamond-bright and turning her lovely head this way, and that to be sure the Duke had marked her arrival. He had. He marked everything. He marked how the crowd bent toward her like grass in wind, and how she gathered their homage as her due, and how her clear laugh carried the length of the room on purpose, and he found, to his own great inconvenience, that he would rather have watched the tired girl at the window than the brightest jewel England could put before him. His aunt reappeared at his elbow as though conjured by his disobedience. "You are doing it again," she said. "Doing what?" "Looking at the grey girl. The whole room has begun to notice where the Duke's eye keeps straying, and I promise you it is not straying toward the 10,000 a year." She followed his gaze once more, and this time she did not make her dismissive sound. This time she was quiet a moment, watching the girl at the window watch the dark. "She bears it well," the dowager admitted at last, grudging as a creditor. "I will say that. There is not one girl in 50 who could stand where they have put her, in what they have put her in, and keep her countenance so. Most would have run home in tears an hour since." She turned her shrewd old eyes up to her nephew's face, and whatever she saw written there made her mouth tighten. "Lorne, I have watched you not look at every hopeful face in 3 counties for 8 years, and I have never once seen you look at one the way you are not looking at that child now. I am too old to pretend I do not know what it means. and too fond of you to be glad of it. There is no fortune there, no name worth the having, and a stepmother who will fight you with poison if you cross her. Leave it be." Lorne set down his empty glass upon the mantel with great care, as a man sets down a thing he means to be quit of, and did not answer her at once. Across the blazing room the girl in the ruined gown lifted her torn hem an inch from the floor, as she had done at the foot of his stair, and let it fall, and stood straight in the one attitude of dignity that cruelty had left her, asking nothing, expecting nothing, wanting, so far as he could see, nothing at all that he had to give. "What is her name?" he said. "Her whole name, not the mother's account of it." The dowager sighed the sigh of a woman who has seen the weather change and knows there is no arguing with a sky. "Westcott," she said. "Rilla Westcott." "And God help you, Lorne, for I begin to think you mean to learn it by heart." He did not deny it. He was looking at Rilla Westcott across the whole bright width of the moor, and for the first time in 8 years the hard, bright shell across his chest had come unbuttoned without his leave, and he did not trouble to fasten it. Somewhere in the crowd her stepmother was already steering the Primrose daughter back toward him. Somewhere a torn gown waited to be laughed at again. And Lorne, Duke of Ethermore, who did not dance and did not smile, and did not on any account cross rooms toward penniless girls, began, very quietly, to think of a way that he might. The great doors of Ethermore had been thrown wide for the better part of an hour, and Lorne, Duke of Ethermore, had watched the parade of his guests from the shallow rise of the staircase with the fixed patience of a man enduring a duty he had not chosen. They came in their satins and their careful smiles, each name announced like a small coin dropped upon a plate, and to each he inclined his head the precise degree that rank required and no further. He had learned long ago that a warmer greeting was taken as an invitation, and that an invitation, once given, was rarely returned in kind. A woman had taught him that, a decade past, taught it thoroughly, with his ring upon her finger and another man's letters folded into her glove, and he had not forgotten the lesson though he had ceased to speak of it aloud. So he stood, and he watched, and he waited for the tedium to reach its appointed end, and he did not expect the room to give him anything he had not already seen 100 times over. Then the last of the late arrivals came through the doors, and something in the ordinary current of the evening caught and turned. She entered a half-step behind 2 other young women, and the contrast between them was the first thing that struck him before he had even settled upon her face. The pair in front swept forward in gowns of ice blue and rose, their hems whispering, their heads high with the particular confidence of those who have never once been made to feel small. And behind them, in a gown that even from the height of the stair, he could see had been used ill, the lace at one shoulder torn and clumsily caught up with a pin, the muslin dulled and marked as though it had been left to the damp, came a young woman who ought, by every rule of the evening, to have looked wretched. She did not look wretched. That was the thing he could not at once account for. She came into the blaze of the chandeliers with her chin level and her shoulders drawn back, neither flaunting the ruin of her dress nor shrinking from it, and she looked about the great hall not with the hunger of a girl come to be admired, but with a plain, unhurried interest, as though she had come to see the room and not to be seen in it. When the 2 ahead of her drifted at once toward the knots of gentlemen near the musicians, she did not follow. She found instead a place near a pillar a little apart, and stood there without fidgeting, without the small anxious touches to the hair and the sleeve that Lorne had watched 1,000 women perform, and she waited composed, in a torn gown, as if she had every right to the floor she stood upon. "Who is that?" he said. His steward, Mr. Dean, followed the line of his glance and consulted the list he carried with the discreet efficiency of long service. "The Westcott sisters, your grace, of Marlow Westcott, the shipping man, deceased these 4 years. The elder 2 are Miss Cordelia and Miss Prudence." He hesitated. "The third, I believe, is Miss Rilla Westcott, a half-sister, I am given to understand. She keeps the house for them by most accounts." "She keeps the house," Lorne repeated. "So it is said, your grace." A servant, then, in all but name, dressed in a gown that her sisters had plainly spoiled before ever she crossed his threshold, and sent among his guests looking as she looked, that they might laugh at her. He had seen the shape of such cruelties often enough to read this one at a glance. What he had not seen before, and what held him now against his own long habit of indifference, was the way she carried the injury. She wore the torn thing as though it were of no more consequence than the weather, as though the malice that had put it upon her had simply failed to reach her. He was still looking at her when Miss Rosanna Kestrel found him. She came upon him from the side, as she had a way of doing, her fan already moving, her smile already arranged. Rosanna Kestrel was the daughter of a viscount whose lands marched with his own, and she had spent the better part of 2 seasons contriving to be wherever the Duke of Ethermore happened to stand. She was handsome. He granted her that with the cool fairness of a man appraising a horse he did not mean to buy. She was also quick and watchful, and he had never once heard her say a thing she'd not believe would advance her. "Your Grace looks grave," she said. "One would think you found your own ball a penance." "I find most things a penance, Miss Kestrel. It is a great economy of feeling." She laughed, the bright practiced laugh, and followed his gaze without seeming to, and he saw the exact moment she understood where it had been resting. Something sharpened behind her eyes. "Oh, that," she said. "You must forgive the spectacle, Your Grace. The youngest Westcott. She is not accustomed to society, poor creature, and it shows sadly, does it not? Though I confess I admire the courage of a girl who will come out in such a state and never think to be ashamed. One almost cannot decide whether it is bravery or simply that she does not know any better. One almost cannot," he said. "I dare say her sisters did what they could for her." Rosanna's fan turned. "They are very good to keep her at all. A half-sister, and no fortune of her own, and, well, you see the gown. There are those who would not have troubled to bring her." "There are those," Lorne said, "who would not have troubled to tear it first." The fan stilled. Rosanna's smile held, but it held the way a thing holds when a hand has gone rigid beneath it, and for a moment she looked at him as though trying to determine whether he had meant what he plainly had meant. He had not raised his voice. He had not looked at her at all. He had gone on watching the girl by the pillar, but the words had landed, and they both knew it, and Rosanna recovered herself with the swiftness of the truly practiced. "Your Grace is severe tonight," she said lightly. "I only meant that the family are to be pitied." "Then we are agreed on the sentiment," he said, "if not upon its object." She curtsied and withdrew, and he did not watch her go. He was aware that he had been unwise. He was aware that Rosanna Kestrel forgot nothing and forgave less, and that he had just handed her a slight she would carry the length of the season and repay when it best suited her. He knew all this, and had known it before he spoke, and had spoken regardless, which was not at all his custom. He held himself to a careful economy in the matter of enemies. He did not spend words upon strangers. And yet the sight of that composed figure in her ruined gown, and the ready contempt in Rosanna's voice as she named her, had pulled the reply out of him before his judgment could close its hand upon it. He told himself it was distaste merely. He had a particular loathing for cruelty done in a soft voice. It was cousin to the thing that had once been done to him. That was all. He would think no more of the Westcott girl. He thought of little else for the next quarter of an hour. He watched, without appearing to watch, the small theatre that played itself out around her. He saw the elder sisters return to her twice, once to press some errand upon her, so that she crossed the whole length of the room to fetch a shawl and bring it back, and was thanked with a laugh that was not kindness, and once merely to be seen standing beside her a moment, the better to display by contrast the freshness of their own gowns and the sorry state of hers. He saw a matron draw her skirts aside as the girl passed, as though shabbiness were a thing that might rub off. He saw 2 young gentlemen look at her and nudge one another and look away smirking. Through all of it the girl kept her countenance. She fetched the shawl without sullenness and without servility. She met the matron's insolence with a small, even inclination of the head, as though she had been paid a courtesy. She did not see the smirking gentleman at all, or chose with great dignity not to. And once, only once, he saw her composure slip, and it undid him more thoroughly than any display of spirit could have done. A child had got loose from a nurse near the doors, a boy of perhaps 5 in a velvet suit, and had come to grief against the leg of a footman, and sat down hard upon the marble with the stunned face of a child, deciding whether the thing was worth crying over. Not one of the glittering company nearest him so much as glanced down. The girl in the torn gown was across the room, but she was there before the nurse. kneeling on that cold floor without a thought for what it would do to a muslin already saving, and Lorne, too far to hear, watched her say some small thing to the boy that turned the trembling lip into a wet, surprised laugh. She set him on his feet. She smoothed his velvet collar with 2 fingers. Then she rose and returned the child to his nurse with a word, and went back to her pillar as though nothing had occurred, and no one in all that shining room had marked it but the Duke of Athermore, who found that he had come 3 steps down the stair without deciding to. He stopped himself. It was absurd. He was a man of 38 who had ordered his heart into permanent winter and found the arrangement entirely to his satisfaction, and he was descending his own staircase like a boy, because a housekeeper in a spoiled gown had been kind to a stranger's child. He returned to his station. He resumed his cold surveillance of the room. He resolved, with real firmness, to go and make the tedious rounds of his more important guests, the men whose custom his estate had reason to court, and to trouble himself no further about a woman he would in all likelihood never be introduced to and had no earthly reason to know. He made perhaps half the circuit. He heard a magistrate out upon the price of corn, and a dowager upon the failings of her physician, and a young lord upon his own hunters, and to each he gave the fraction of himself that was owed and no more. And the whole time some restless part of his attention was turned away from them toward a pillar on the far side of the room, and would not be recalled. At last, because it was intolerable to a man of his temper to be governed by a curiosity he could not master, he did the thing he had told himself he would not do. He crossed the room. He did not go directly to her. Even undone, he retained enough of himself for that. He went by way of a table where iced wines had been set out, and it was there, reaching for a glass at the same moment, that they came at last into true proximity, and she looked up, and he saw her face fully for the first time. She was not a beauty in the manner the room prized. Her sisters were the handsomer, by the measure of the fashion plates, but there was a steadiness in her grey eyes, a clear and unhurried directness, that made the arranged prettiness he had been looking at all evening seem suddenly a poor and fretful thing. She knew him. He saw her know him. Saw the small widening of understanding as she took in the quality of his coat and the space the other guests had left about him, and he waited, with a wariness that was almost a hope, for the change that always came, the softening, the lowering of the lashes. The voice pitched half a tone sweeter. It did not come. "Your Grace," she said, and curtsied, correctly and without a trace of performance, and stepped back to leave him the glasses. "You need not surrender the whole table to me," he said. "I am told there is enough wine at Athermore to drown a regiment. Take your glass, Miss Westcott." Her brows drew the smallest degree together at his knowing her name, he thought, and was pleased absurdly to have surprised her. She took a glass. "Thank you," she said. That was all. She did not seize the opening he had left her. She did not tell him what an honor it was, nor how splendid his house, nor how she had longed to see it. She did not angle for another word. She drank her wine and looked at the dancers and let the silence be a silence, and gave every appearance of a woman entirely willing to have the great Duke of Athermore say nothing further to her at all. It was so wholly unlike anything the room had offered him in 10 years that he found himself, for the first time in longer than he could recall, at some pains for what to say. "You are not dancing," he said. "No, Your Grace. Do you not care for it?" "I care for it very much." She said it simply, without the least bid for pity, as a person states a plain fact. "But one must be asked, and I am not, tonight, the sort of guest who is asked. It is quite all right. I find one sees a great deal more from the edge of a room than from the middle of it." She glanced at him then, and there was something almost like humour moving far back in the grey eyes. "You would know that better than most, I think. You have watched this whole evening from your stair and come down only once." He was silent a moment. It was in his power to end the conversation there, to let the small insolence as her own doing and withdraw with his dignity fastened once more about him. He had done as much to duchesses. He found he did not wish to. "You presume to know a great deal about how I have spent my evening," he said, "for one who has spent hers behind a pillar. The pillar is an excellent situation, Your Grace. It is a great pity more is not made of it." She said it without heat, almost kindly, as though she were commending him a chair. From it one learns which of the great people are enjoying themselves and which are only pretending to, and I will tell you truthfully that it is a very short list of the first sort, and that you are not upon it. He had told no one he had come down. He had thought no one had seen. You were watching me, he said. Everyone in this room is watching you, your grace, she answered. It costs nothing and requires no introduction. I only happened to be watching when you did something the others did not. And what was that? You looked at the boy who fell. She turned her glass slowly in her fingers. No one else did. I thought perhaps you were not so cold as they have all told me you are. He ought to have found the impertinence unpardonable. He had ended lesser acquaintances for less. Instead he stood at the wine table in his own crowded hall and felt, for the space of a breath, as though a window long painted shut had been forced open a hand's width, and cold clean air had come through it into a room he had kept sealed so long he had ceased to notice how close the air within had grown. Across the room he was aware of Rosanna Kestrel watching him watch the Westcott girl, and of the elder sisters beginning to notice too, their heads turning, their bright surprise curdling towards something less pleasant. He was aware that to remain another minute at this table was to be remarked upon by every soul present, and that remark, once made, would fall upon the girl and not upon him, for the world is arranged to spare dukes and to ruin housekeepers. He knew he ought to bow and move on, and let the evening close its ordinary hand over the whole small strange encounter. He set down his glass. He did not move on. They have told you a great deal about me, it seems, he said, for a woman who has not been introduced. They tell everyone, your grace. It is the chief entertainment of the season. She met his eyes without flinching. Shall I tell you what they say, or would you rather go on believing I invented it? I would rather, he said slowly, hear what you make of it yourself. The one is common. The other, I begin to suspect, is not, and the Duke of Athamore, who had come to his own ball resolved to endure it and be rid of it, discovered that he could not for his life imagine leaving that pillar, that table, or the plain grey gaze of the one woman in the room who had asked him for nothing, and had, in the asking of nothing, undone in a quarter of an hour the careful work of 10 cold years. She was silent a moment, and he watched her weigh the question with the same unhurried care she had brought to the room itself, as though a duke's request and a torn hem were matters of one order and neither worth a flutter. They say you are cold, she answered at last. That is what I make of it, not whether you are, but that they need you to be. A cold man is easier to stand near than a wounded one. If you are only cruel, then a woman may despise you and feel herself the safer for it. But if you were ever hurt into your silence, then someone must have done it, and any of them might be next, and that is a far less comfortable thing to carry across a ballroom. She lifted her grey eyes to his. So they have settled on cold. It costs them nothing, and it lets them keep their appetites. Lorne did not answer at once, for the plain truth of it had gone through him like the draught from an opened door. He had spent 10 years being called cold by people who preferred the word to the trouble of looking closer, and not one of them had ever named aloud the thing beneath it, had ever in his hearing allowed that a man might be shut rather than empty. That this should come to him now from a housekeeper in a spoiled gown, offered without triumph and without any evident wish to please him by it, was a circumstance for which his long practice had left him wholly unprepared. You are very free, he said, with a man you have not been introduced to. You asked, your grace. A faint warmth moved at the corner of her mouth, gone as soon as seen. I could have told you that you were the handsomest man in England and the kindest, and you would have known I lied, and thought the less of me for it and been quite comfortable. I find I would rather be thought forward than false. It is the only luxury I can afford this evening. He might have said a great many things. What he did, to his own faint astonishment, was very nearly smile, the muscles of it stirring in a face that had forgotten the shape, and it was in that unguarded instant, with his attention wholly given to the woman at the pillar, that the tide of the room turned upon them both. He heard her before he saw her, the particular laugh of Rosanna Kestrel, silvered and carrying, pitched always a shade louder than the moment required so that it might gather an audience as it came. She crossed the floor with 2 of the younger Ashby girls in her train, and the elder Westcott sisters drawn along in her wake, like ribbon behind a fast carriage. and she arrived before the pillar with her fan already spread, her eyes already bright with the pleasure of what she had come to do. "Your Grace," she said, sinking into a curtsy exactly as deep as her own consequence, "we could not think what had become of you. To hide yourself away in a corner, and with such company." The fan tilted to Rilla, a small precise gesture, the way one might indicate a stain upon a cloth. "Then you are ever charitable. Cordelia, is this not your sister, the one who could not be spared from the linen closet? How good of the Duke to let her rest her feet a moment before she goes back to it." The laugh ran round the little half-circle on cue. Cordelia Westcott coloured and said, "Too quickly. She would come, Your Grace. We told her the invitation could hardly mean her, but she is stubborn," and Prudence added behind her fan, something about the gown that Lorne did not catch entire and was glad not to, for even the fragment of it was ugly. Rosanna surveyed the ruin of the muslin from hem to torn shoulder with a leisurely, appraising sweep, and let the silence stretch until it grew cruel of its own weight. "Poor creature," she said at last, gently, which was the worst of it, for gentleness gave the knife a longer reach. "One does wonder what she imagined. To come among us dressed as though she had been dragged through a hedge, and to stand so, as if she belonged. There is a kind of person, Your Grace, who does not know her place until it is shown to her. I do think it a mercy to show it. Do not you?" Lorne felt the old still cold gathering in his chest, the thing he wore in place of temper, and he was on the point of using it, for a word from him would scatter this little court like sparrows, and he was not disinclined to speak it. When Rilla Westcott set her hand lightly upon the back of the chair beside her and answered first, and he found, to his surprise, that he wished to hear her more than he wished to defend her. "You are quite right, Miss Kestrel," she said. Her voice was low and perfectly even, and it not tremble. "The gown is ruined. It was ruined this afternoon, by hands I could name if would entertain the company, and I chose to come in it rather than not come at all, because I was asked, and because I have found that a torn dress shames only the one who tore it, and never the one who wears it kindly." She let that settle. "As for my place, I do know it. I have kept a house since I was 16, and mended what others spoiled, and I have learned in the doing of it to tell the difference between a person who is poor and a person who is small. The one is a matter of circumstance, and may be mended like a hem. The other is a matter of the heart, and I have never yet seen it mended by a fine gown. I would not change places with you tonight for all the silk in this room." For a moment no one laughed at all. It was, Lorne thought, the most complete thing he had ever watched done with words, no heat in it, no scramble, no appeal to him or to any protector, only the quiet closing of a door in a manner that left the one shut out unable even to complain of the draught. Rosanna Kestrel's colour rose in 2 hard spots high on her cheeks. The Ashby girls had stopped fanning themselves. And Cordelia Westcott was looking at her sister with an expression Lorne could not name, in which dislike and something very like fright were curiously mixed, as though she had brought a caged thing to be mocked and found it was not caged after all. Rosanna gathered herself to answer. He saw the breath drawn for it, saw the fan snap half-closed, and it was there, in the half-second before her recovery, that Lorne chose to spend the thing he had been holding. "Miss Kestrel," he said. He did not raise his voice. He had never in his life needed to. The single word fell into the little circle and stilled it, and every face turned to him, and he let them wait upon him the length of a breath before he went on, because he had learned that a duke's silence carried further than his speech. "You spoke just now of showing a person her place." He held her eyes. "You will forgive me if I take the office from you. Miss Westcott stands at this moment upon the floor of my house, which she entered by my invitation and honours by her presence. That is her place. I find I like it very well where it is." He turned the whole cold weight of his attention full upon Rosanna Kestrel, and watched her feel it. "As for the linen closet, I keep a great many rooms at Athermore, and I have found the persons who work honestly in the small ones to be, without exception, better company than those who are idle in the great. I should be sorry to think any guest of mine had forgotten it." "I am sure you had not." The reproof was the more terrible for being wrapped in courtesy so smooth that she could not, before witnesses, take open offence at it without confessing what she was. Rosanna Kestrel curtsied. She had no other refuge, and said, in a voice from which all the silver had drained, "Of course, your grace. I meant only a pleasantry," and Lorne inclined his head the exact degree that dismissed her, and she went, and the Ashby girls went with her, and the Westcott sisters melted after into the safer crowd, leaving him standing at the pillar with the woman he had just defended, and no earthly notion of what a man was supposed to say next. He had surprised himself. He knew it even as the little court dispersed. He was not a man who intervened. Intervention was warmth, and warmth was the door through which every grief of his life had come. He had watched cruelties at 100 such gatherings and let them run their course, telling himself it was not his affair, that the world would go on being the world whether a duke frowned at it or no. And he had crossed none of that tonight so much as forgotten it, had spoken before the cold counsel in him could rise, because the sight of that steady grey composure being pecked at by lesser creatures had been, quite simply, more than he could stand to watch. "You ought not to have done that," Rilla said quietly, when they were alone in the small island the crowd had left them. She was not looking at him with gratitude. That, he found, was its own peculiar relief. No, they will not forgive it. Not the reproof. A woman like Miss Kestrel forgets an insult by morning. But they will not forgive that you saw me. That is the unpardonable thing. She turned her face up to his, and there was no reproach in it, only a kind of grave honesty that asked to be met in kind. "Tomorrow it will be said that I contrived it, that I tore my own gown to draw your notice, and stood by your pillar like a beggar at a gate, and made you pity me into a scene. By the time it has gone round the season 3 times, I shall be a schemer and a fortune hunter, and you shall be a poor bewitched creature I entrapped, and every soul who laughed at me tonight will feel themselves handsomely revenged. You have made me a great deal more interesting than is safe, your grace. I had rather have been left dull." "You could not be dull," he said, "if you gave your whole mind to it," and was faintly startled to hear the thing come out of his own mouth, for it was near to a gallantry, and he had thought that instrument rusted past use. She did smile then, briefly and truly, and it changed her face as the lifting of a cloud changes a plain field, so that he understood all at once why he had not been able to look away from her across the whole width of the room. "There," she said, "you see. That was a kindness, and you will regret it. You have the look of a man who counts his kindnesses afterward and finds them all mistakes. I have found most of them so. And yet you keep making them." She tilted her head, studying him with that plain, unhurried interest she had turned upon the whole hall when first she entered it, as though he were a room she had come to see and not a duke she had come to flatter. "That is the part you have not reasoned out, I think. A truly cold man would have let Miss Kestrel have her sport and thought no more of it than of a fly at the window. You did not. You spent your consequence on a housekeeper you had known a quarter of an hour, before witnesses, in a matter that could bring you nothing but talk. A cold man does not do that, your grace. A cold man cannot. Whatever you have persuaded the county to call you, the evidence is against it, and I am afraid I was there to see. You make a poor case for my comfort," he said. "I make a true one. You may have the comfort or the truth. I have already told you which I keep in stock, and there was so little malice in it, and so much steady warmth beneath the plainness, that he could not for his life take offence and did not wish to. I do not doubt it." She said it without pity, and it was the absence of pity that undid him. Everyone had pitied him, the jilted duke, the man whose bride had kept another's letters in her glove. The whole county had pitied him for 10 years with a relish that was half its own entertainment, and he had built his coldness partly to be free of it. This woman, who had every claim upon his sympathy and wanted none of it, extended him none in return, and the plain equality of that was worth more to him than a decade of soft looks. "But you were hurt once past mending, and you decided the fault was in feeling anything at all, and you have run your life since on the principle that a locked door cannot be broken into. It is a sound principle. It only forgets that no one can bring you anything through it either." He stood very still. Across the room the musicians were tuning for the first set. He could hear the long, slow draw of the strings coming true, and the shift of the crowd toward the floor, and Mr. Dean somewhere at the edge of things waiting to know his master's pleasure. All of it seemed to him suddenly to be happening at a great distance, on the far side of a glass, and only this small square of parquet by the pillar to be real. "You speak," he said, "as though you knew a great deal about locked doors." I keep house, your grace. I know every lock in it. The lightness did not quite hide the thing beneath, and I know that the doors we lock hardest are not the ones that keep out thieves. Those we leave a servant to mind. It is the other kind we sit up nights guarding ourselves, the ones with nothing behind them any longer but the memory of what was taken. Those we guard the hardest of all, and to the least purpose, for the room is already empty and no one is coming to rob it twice. She had not raised her voice above the murmur of the ball. She had said nothing that any passing stranger could have marked as more than pleasant talk, and yet Lorne felt as though she had walked, unhurried and unafraid, straight into the one room of himself he had let no living soul enter in 10 years, had looked about it without dismay, and had remarked kindly that he might open the shutters now, for the weather had turned some while ago and he had not noticed. "Who are you?" he said low, and it was not quite a question and not quite an accusation. "To say such things to me?" "No one at all," she answered. "That is rather the point. I have nothing to gain by flattering you and nothing to lose by telling you the truth, and so I am the one person in this room who can afford to do either. Tomorrow I shall be a housekeeper again, and you a duke, and we shall neither of us presume to remember this. But it is not tomorrow yet." She glanced toward the floor, where the couples were beginning to form their lines under the great blaze of the chandeliers, and something crossed her face, quickly mastered, not longing exactly, but the practiced putting away of a thing one has taught oneself not to want. "You had better go and open your ball, your grace. They are waiting on you. They will not begin until you have chosen your partner, and the whole room is watching to see who it is." And there it was, the plain sense of it, the reminder of everything he was and everything she was not, delivered by her own hand as a courtesy, freeing him to walk away and be exactly the duke the evening required of him. She had given him the door and stepped back from it to let him pass. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to take it. Lorne looked at the waiting floor, and at the couples arranging themselves, and at the great gilded room full of people who had come to be seen, and to see whom he would honor. And he looked back at the woman standing quietly by the pillar in her ruined gown, asking him for nothing, granting him leave to go, and he discovered, with a jolt that went to the soles of his feet, that the single thing in all the wide world he did not want to do was walk away from her. He did not yet know what he would do instead. He knew only, standing there while the strings drew true and the first bars trembled on the air, that he had come to his own ball armored against everything it could offer him, and that this overlooked, unintroduced, unflinching creature had got clean past the armor without once trying to, and that the prospect of the whole remaining evening spent anywhere but at her side had become, in the space of half an hour, entirely and unaccountably unbearable. The musicians in the gallery drew their bows across the first long chord of the evening's dancing, and the great room turned upon itself like a wheel, the couples flowing toward the center, the mothers craning, the whole bright machine of the season grinding into its appointed motion. It was the moment Lorne had dreaded since morning, the moment when 100 faces would turn to see whom the Duke of Athermore would lead out first, and a dozen mothers would arrange their daughters like cut flowers in the path of his eye. He had planned to stand it out by the fire and dance with no one, and let them all draw what conclusions they pleased. He had not planned on the plain grey gaze at his elbow, nor on the fact that the thought of leaving it had become, in the last quarter hour, very nearly intolerable to him. "You will be wanted," Rilla said. She had marked the turning of the room as quickly as he had. "They are forming for the dance, and the whole county is waiting to see where you go. It would be kinder to them, your grace, and safer for me, if you went there quickly and forgot you had ever spoken to a woman behind a pillar." "Safer for you," he repeated. "You know it is." She said it plainly, without reproach, a housekeeper counting the linen. A duke may stand an hour at the wine table with a torn-gowned nobody and lose nothing by it but an hour. The nobody loses a good deal more. By tomorrow they will have decided what I did to earn the notice, and none of it will be to my credit, and I shall carry it home to a house that already grudges me the bread. She lifted her chin that same half-inch he had watched her lift all evening. "I am not complaining. I am telling you the price, so that you may choose to pay it or not with your eyes open. That is all." He looked at her a long moment. The room was loud and close and full of watching, and he was aware, as a swimmer is aware of a current, Of Rosanna Kestrel's gold head turned toward them across the whole width of the floor, and of the stepmother's sharp face beyond her, and of the two sisters gathering their skirts to be led out by lesser men and glancing, again and again, at the pillar where the wrong Westcott stood too long beside the greatest match in England. Then we shall not stand here to be priced, he said, and did the one thing that no one in the room was watching for, because it was the one thing he had never in his life been known to do. He did not lead her to the floor, where every eye would fall on the grey gown and tear it further. He turned and walked, unhurried, toward the long windows at the room's cold end that gave onto the terrace and the dark gardens beyond, and he did it in such a way, pausing to say a word to his steward, nodding to a colonel, that a man watching would have seen only the Duke going out for air from his own crush, as Dukes did. And Rilla, after the smallest hesitation, understanding the whole of it, drifted after him along the wall as a servant drifts, unremarked, so that when the tall glass door let them out into the night not one soul in that bright hall could have sworn they had left together. The cold came up off the stone like water. The noise fell away behind the glass to a muffled gold murmur, and the garden opened before them grey and silver under a rind of moon, the gravel walks pale, the yew hedges black, the far fountain catching the light in a thin moving thread. Lorne drew a breath of the clean night and felt the shell across his chest, that he had worn 8 years and buttoned tight against every ballroom in the county, sit strangely loose upon him. "You will be cold," he said. He had already stripped off his coat before he had well considered it, and he laid it about her shoulders, and in the laying his hands were for an instant very near the bare nape of her neck, and neither of them moved, and the whole night seemed to lean in and go still. Then he stepped back, and she gathered the coat close with both hands, and the moment folded itself away, unspoken, the more powerful for being unspoken. "You should not," she said quietly. "If anyone came out, no one will come out. It is January, and there is claret within." He set his hands behind his back, which was where he put them when he did not trust them. "Tell me your circumstances, Miss Westcott, plainly. I have had the version your stepmother wishes me to have, the delicate girl who prefers her needle and is happier at home. I should like the true one." She was quiet a moment, looking out at the pale walks. When she spoke it was without a trace of the self-pity he had braced himself to hear, and that absence undid him more than tears would have. "My father was a gentleman of small estate and smaller sense in money," she said. "He loved 2 things past prudence, my mother, and after she died, the woman he married to give me a mother again, Hester Westcott. He believed her kind because she was handsome and spoke softly, and he did not live long enough to learn the difference. He left what little there was to her, trusting her to keep me, and he died when I was 14, and she has kept me ever since. A small dry breath that was not quite a laugh. She has kept me as one keeps a serviceable thing. I dress the girls' hair and turn the sisters' gowns and keep the household books, because I have a head for figures and she has none, and I am fed and housed and told, when I forget it, how much I owe her charity. In the spring I am to go to a cousin of hers in the north as companion to an old lady who has already worn out 3. That is my situation, your grace. It is not a tragedy. Half the gentlewomen in England with no fortune come to the same, and most of them had no torn gown to warn them what to expect. "The gown," he said. "It was done to you." She did not pretend to misunderstand. "It was promised me whole, and given me torn this afternoon, when it was too late to mend it and too late to refuse to come. Yes." She turned the coat's collar up against the wind with a servant's unthinking economy. "They did not do it to be cruel only. They did it because a duke was to be here, and it would not do for the poor sister to be seen to any advantage beside the daughters of the house. I understood it the moment I saw the scissors work. I have understood a great many things by looking at them plainly instead of wishing them otherwise. It is the one accomplishment I have that Hester did not manage to sell. And yet you came," he said, "torn, and knowing it, and knowing what would be made of it. Another woman would have taken to her bed with a headache and spared herself the whole of it. Another woman would have a bed of her own to take too," she answered, without bitterness, only with that plain arithmetic of hers. "I came because I was bid to come, and it is cheaper to be obedient than to be argued with. And I came, if you will have the whole truth, because I have spent 8 years within 4 walls that smell of other people's suppers, and a great house lit for a ball is a thing I not see again this side of the North Country, and I thought I might as well stand behind a pillar and look at it, torn hem and all, and keep the looking to warm myself by afterward. I did not think the master of it would come down the stair and speak to me. That was not in my reckoning at all. She glanced up at him, wry. You have quite spoiled a very economical evening, your grace. I had meant to want nothing, and now I am obliged to want to have imagined none of it. He found he could not answer at once. He had expected, when he pressed her, to hear the old familiar music of a woman making herself pitiable for a rich man's benefit. He had heard it so often he could have hummed the tune, and instead she had laid her whole hard history before him like an account rendered, asking nothing, angling for nothing, not even for his sympathy, and had turned to look out at his dark garden as though the telling had cost her no more than the reading of a bill. And Lorne, who had built a life upon the certainty that a warm face turned up to his own was a shop front and a woman's tenderness a coin, stood in the cold and understood that he was looking at the first face in 8 years that wanted absolutely nothing from him, and that the wanting nothing had done in an evening what all the wanting in the county had never once come near. You look at me, she observed, as though I had said something remarkable. I have only said something true. People find that remarkable, which tells you a good deal about people. They tell me I am cold, he said abruptly. It was not what he had meant to say. You said it yourself, within, that they have all told you I am cold. Do you know why they say it? Because you do not smile at women with 10,000 a year, she said, and it wounds them, and a wound must have a name, so they call it coldness. She studied him in the moon-grey light. But I do not think you are cold, your grace. I think you are guarded, which is a different thing entirely, and a wiser one, and it comes from having once not been guarded at all and having paid for it. Cold men do not look at the boy who falls. They have nothing left in them to do the looking with. The accuracy of it went through him like a blade drawn clean, without pain, and then, a heartbeat later, with a great deal of it, he turned his face to the garden. There was a woman, he said, and stopped, astonished at himself, for he had told no living soul the whole of it, and here he was giving it to a housekeeper in the dark, in a garden not unlike this one. She swore she wanted nothing in the world but me. I believed her, being younger and a fool, and an hour after I had all but offered for her I heard her laughing to her cousin that the park was the true jewel and either setting one endured to wear it. I did not marry her. I have not married anyone. I built her a manor that would let no such thing near me again, and I have worn it so long I had forgot I was wearing it until an hour ago, behind a pillar, when a woman who had every reason to flatter me, for my acres told me instead that I was not on the short list of persons enjoying the evening. He looked back at her. You have made me tell you a thing I meant to carry to my grave, Miss Westcott, and I cannot for the life of me determine how you did it. I did nothing, she said, but her voice had gone gentler, and the gentleness was not a shop front. He had learned, this evening, to tell the difference, and knowing it he felt the last button of the old shell give way. You told me because you have wanted, for 8 years, to tell someone who would not weigh it for advantage, and I have no advantage to weigh it for. In the spring I shall be 400 miles north minding an old woman's tisanes, and whatever a duke says to me tonight in a cold garden will go north with me and never come south again. I am the safest confidante in England, your grace. It is nearly the only thing I am good for. That, said Lorne, is the least true thing you have said all evening. She looked up at him then, full, and the moon was on her plain grey eyes, and something in her face, the chin held level, the mouth that would not beg, the wariness worn like armour over a warmth she guarded quite as fiercely as he guarded his. Something in it caught at him past all his sense, and he found he had lifted his hand, without deciding to, and that his fingers were very near her cheek where a strand of dark hair had come loose to the wind. She did not draw back. She went still, as she had gone still under the coat, and for one long suspended moment the whole freezing garden hung upon whether he would close the small bright distance or not, and he wanted to more than he had wanted anything in 8 guarded years. He did not. He let his hand fall, because she was cold and friendless and in his power and under his roof, and because to have touched her there in the dark, however his blood clamoured for it, would have been to prove her stepmother right and the whole watching county right, and to make of the one clean thing in the evening another shopfront transaction, and he would sooner have cut off the hand. She saw the choice him make, he watched her see it, and something moved behind her eyes that was not relief and was not disappointment, but was, he thought, the beginning of the very thing he had ceased to believe a woman could feel for him, and not for his park. "You are a better man than they say, your grace," she said, very low. "I am a worse one," he answered, "and only lately trying to mend, and you are the whole cause of the attempt, Miss Westcott." He stopped. He'd been about to say a thing that a duke may not say to a penniless companion in a garden at night without ruining her, and he had sense enough left, barely, to swallow it. "You will not go north in the spring," he said instead. "I do not yet know how, but you will not. I have undone in one evening the work of 10 years, and I do not intend to hand the ruin of it a coach ticket to the North Country." "Do not," she said, and now there was something almost like fear in her steadiness. "Do not make me a promise in a garden, your grace. I have lived 8 years on the far side of promises made by handsome people in soft voices, and I have learned to warm myself at them, and never once to believe them, and it is the only warmth I can afford. If you mean it, you will mean it tomorrow in the daylight where it costs you something. And if you do not mean it, then leave me the one dignity I came out here with, and do not say it at all." It was, he thought, the bravest and the most wounding thing anyone had said to him in his life, and it was entirely just. He inclined his head to her, the bow he gave to equals and had never once given below his rank. "Then I will say it tomorrow," he said, "in the daylight, and every day after, until you are tired of hearing it. Now take my arm as far as the door, for you are half frozen, and go in before me. And give my coat to no one, but keep it, and I will send to your stepmother's house tomorrow on a pretext of business that will fool no one but will serve." He drew her cold hand through his arm, and she let him. And they went up the pale gravel toward the gold windows with the muffled music swelling behind the glass, and it was there, at the terrace steps, that he saw her. Rosanna Kestrel stood just within the tall-lit window, a glass of claret forgotten in her hand, and she had been standing there. He understood it in one cold instant, long enough. The lovely face was quite composed, which was worse than any fury, and the diamond-bright eyes went from the Duke's coat about the housekeeper's shoulders to the housekeeper's hand upon the Duke's arm, and then up to Lorne's own face, and something behind them shut like a strong-room door. She smiled at him, a small, brilliant, patient smile, and turned, unhurried, back into the light and the crowd, toward the corner where Hester Westcott stood counting her daughter's partners. Lorne felt Rilla's hand go rigid on his arm. She saw, Rilla said. It was not a question. She saw. He looked at the closing crowd where the gold head had vanished, and the old cold logic that had made him feared at every table in 3 counties woke in him, and read the whole coming shape of it as clear as a map upon a table. The beauty scorned, the stepmother thwarted. The two of them finding each other across a ballroom with a common wound and a common enemy in a torn grey gown. "Go in," he said quietly, "and keep to the wall, and speak to no one. And above all, do not let them see that anything at all has passed between us tonight that mattered. Whatever they attempt, and they will attempt something, Miss Westcott, for that woman does not lose a thing she has decided is hers, and I begin to think she has decided upon me. You are to remember one thing only." "And what is that?" she said, her eyes on the lit window and the gathering storm behind it. "That I said it in the garden first," said the Duke of Ethermore, "before I knew it would cost me anything, which is the only kind of saying that has ever been worth the breath." And he let go her hand, and stood back into the dark to let her pass in alone, and watched the torn grey gown go through the bright door into a room where 2 women who did not lose a just between them decided to make her pay. He came back into the heat and blaze of the ballroom a changed man, and knew it, and did not greatly care who read it in his face. The music had swelled again in his absence. The floor was a turning garden of silks, and the candles had burned down an inch and grown warmer for it, and somewhere beneath the fiddles ran the low, continual river of talk that was the true business of the night. Lorne moved through it as he had moved through 1,000 such rooms, with the space opening before him that always opened, and for once he was glad of the space, for it let him look over the bright heads. For one plain grey figure he had left not a quarter of an hour since in the quiet beyond the great doors, left with her hand still warm against his sleeve where he had not quite let himself take it, and her voice still in him like a coal a man carries in his cupped palms against the cold. He had come to this ball armored. He was going back into it undone, and had made up his mind, somewhere between the dark and the doorway, that he would not trouble to mend the armor again. He would find her. He would stand beside her openly before Rosanna Kestrel and the Ashby girls and his own aunt and the whole Ovid county, and let them make of it what they would. A duke might do a great many things and be forgiven by morning, if he only did them without shame. He had spent 8 years being ashamed of nothing because he had allowed himself to want nothing. He found he would rather want and be watched wanting than be safe another hour. He did not reach her. He was perhaps 20 steps into the room when he felt the change in it, felt it before he understood it, the way a man wakes in the night to a silence where a clock has stopped. The talk near the far wall had altered its pitch. It had drawn in upon itself and then spread outward in a widening ring, head bending to head, fans lifting, a low urgent hum with a bright hard edge to it that he had heard before and mistrusted on his life. Something had happened, or was being made to happen. He turned toward it against the pull of every prudent instinct he owned, and saw the Dowager Marchioness of Brede in the center of a knot of people with her hand pressed flat to the black bombazine of her bosom, and her face gone the color of tallow. "Gone," Lady Ottoline was saying, in a voice unlike her own, thin and appalled. "It cannot simply be gone. It was at my throat not an hour since. I felt Marston clasp it. The Athamore rose, Lorne, your mother's brooch, the great diamond your grandfather brought out of the Indies. It is not at my throat now." He came up beside her and looked, and it was true. The swag of old diamonds she wore each year, by his own asking, was broken at its heart, the empty gold claws staring up naked where the great stone should have sat. For one cold instant the room and the music went very far away, and he saw not the ballroom, but a smaller, quieter scene 8 years buried, a woman's white hand and his mother's ring upon it, worn boldly for all the county to admire, and the ring's absence afterward. Sold in a back street in the city while the woman who had smiled at him and sworn she loved him rode north with a richer man. He had defended her to his own aunt's face. He had staked his name upon her before witnesses who had tried to warn him. He had learned, from the wreck of it, the one lesson he had built his whole hard life upon since, that the women who smiled at him wanted the Athamore stones, and never the man who guarded them, and that the surest fool in any room was the fool who let himself be moved. "It has been taken," said Rosanna Kestrel. She had come up on the dowager's other side, and she said it quietly, regretfully, with her fan half spread across her breast, as though to shield her own tender feelings from what duty compelled her to speak, and the very softness of it carried to the edges of the gathering crowd. "Forgive me, your grace. I would give a great deal not to be the one to say it, but a stone of that size does not fall from a clasp and roll beneath a chair. A clasp of that make does not come open of itself. It has been unfastened by a hand that knew how, and in a press of people, and by someone who could come close to the Marchioness without being remarked. We are none of us strangers here." She let her gaze travel, slow and grieved and perfectly aimed, across the bright company, and let it stop and rest and gather every other eye along with it, upon the one figure in all that room who wore a torn grey gown and stood a little apart against the panelling, where she had been standing, Lorne saw, waiting for him to come back to her. "Except," said Rosanna Kestrel gently, "the one among us who is not a guest at all." "No," said Lorne. He said it low, and it did not carry as hers had carried, and it did nothing, for the thing was already in motion and had its own dreadful momentum. The momentum of a crowd that has been handed a victim and a reason in the same breath, and asks nothing better than to be spared the trouble of doubting either. Hester Westcott was already pressing forward through the press with her 2 daughters at her heels, her twice-widowed face arranged in a horror so fluent it could only have been rehearsed. "Rilla," she cried, wringing her gloved hands. "Oh, Rilla, what have you done?" I said. "Did I not, Cordelia? I said we ought never to have brought her among such fine things. She has not been raised to it. She cannot help herself. The poor creature has never in her life been near anything of worth. And it was so cunningly done, the grief and the accusation folded into one motherly wail, that half the room took it for the reluctant testimony of a woman betrayed by her own kin, and not for what Lorne, standing very still now, understood it in his marrow to be. It had been built. He saw the whole architecture of it as plainly as he had seen the torn gown that afternoon in his mind's eye, saw it laid out cold and complete, a thing constructed over hours by patient hands. The gown had been ruined so that she should be marked out, singular, the one figure no eye could mistake. She had been sent among his guests, looking as she looked, so that when the moment came there should be a shape already prepared in every mind for the word thief to be poured into. Rosanna Kestrel had not forgotten the slight he had dealt her by the pillar. She forgot nothing and forgave less. She had told him so with her own eyes as she curtsied and withdrew, and here was the repayment, exact and patient and aimed not at him. He was untouchable, and she was far too clever to touch him, but at the one soft place he had been fool enough to show her. Ruin the girl, and you did not need to ruin the Duke. The Duke would ruin himself, standing helpless while it was done, or he would save himself and abandon her, and either way the plain grey creature who had dared to be seen would be swept off the board, and the season would close its ordinary hand over the whole affair by morning. "Search her," said one of the Ashby girls, breathless, thrilled. "If she has nothing to hide, she will not mind it. Search her things. She carries a reticule," said Rosanna, who had surely marked it hours ago, "there upon her wrist. And the gown, one hardly likes to say it, but a torn seam makes so convenient a pocket, does it not? A stone slipped into a lining. It is the oldest trick of the servants' hall. My own mother lost a ruby so once to a girl we had trusted for years. Every eye went to the ragged place at Rilla Westcott's shoulder where the muslin had been torn clean and pinned back that afternoon by unloving hands, the wound in the cloth she had held her fan low all evening to hide, and the torn place, which had been done to shame her, became in an instant the very proof of her guilt, the pocket cut ready to her hand. Lorne heard the intake of breath go round the crowd like wind through barley. He saw Cordelia Westcott's face, and it was not triumph upon it. It was the same fright he had glimpsed there earlier in the evening, the look of a girl who had helped to bait a trap for sport and found it had teeth she had not reckoned on. And he saw Rilla. She had not moved. She stood against the panelling with her spine as straight as had been at the foot of his stair, and she was not looking at her accusers, and she was not weeping, and she was not appealing to the crowd or wringing her hands or crying out the truth in a voice cracked with fear, all of which would have been believed a little and pitied not at all. She was looking at him. Across the whole avid width of the room, over the turned heads and the lifted fans, Rilla Westcott was looking at Lorne Duke of Ethermore, with those clear grey eyes that had never once flattered him, and there was no plea in them. That was the thing that broke him and the thing that stayed his hand in the same instant. She was not begging him to save her. She was watching with a terrible quiet to see what he was. And for one moment he would carry like a scar the rest of his life, and never forgive himself, and never quite tell her the whole of Lorne wavered. It came up out of the old ground before he could set his heel against it, the poison 8 years distilled, that he had done this once before. He had stood in a bright room and defended a woman against every soul who loved him and tried to warn him, had spent his consequence and his name and the last soft thing in his chest upon a face that would not flatter him, that met his eyes so plainly, that asked him for nothing, and nothing was the very lure, was it not? Nothing was what the cleverest of them all had learned to offer. Because a man armoured against flattery may still be pierced clean through by the woman who declines to flatter him. He knew what the whole county would say of him by morning. He heard it already, the great cold Duke of Ethermore, proof against every heiress in 3 shires, undone at last by a penniless housekeeper who tore her own gown to catch his eye and picked his mother's diamond from his aunt's throat while he stood by bewitched. It would be said that she had contrived it. She had told him so herself by the pillar. Tomorrow it will be said that I contrived it. She had told him the very shape the lie would take, and here it was arriving on the hour, and how neatly whispered the old cold voice. How neatly a schemer prepares her defence by naming the accusation before it is made. Everyone he had ever trusted had wanted the stones. He had built a life on knowing it. And the life he had built creaked now all at once, under the whole weight of 8 years, and asked him reasonably prudently, in his own dead father's careful voice, whether he truly meant to stake it all again upon a face. He said nothing. That was his crime, and he knew it even as he committed it, standing dumb while the seconds fell. He did not join the accusation. His tongue would not have formed the word against her to save his soul. But neither did he cross the 3 yards of parquet and set himself between her and the wolves as he had set himself an hour before against Rosanna's smaller cruelty, when the cost had been nothing but talk. Now the cost was his pride, his name, the whole grim edifice of his caution, and he hesitated, and in the hesitating he let the silence stand, and the silence was an answer. He saw her read it. He saw the last of something go out her grey eyes, not with reproach, never with reproach, but with a kind of grave settling, as a person settles who has hoped for one thing against her better knowledge and been shown, gently, that she was right not to have hope. "You need not search my reticule," Rilla Westcott said. Her voice was low and perfectly even, and it did not tremble, and it silenced the crowd more surely than any outcry could have done. She lifted the little beaded bag from her wrist and held it out, open upon her flat palm, and then she set it down upon the nearest chair where any hand might take it. "You need not search it, because you will find nothing in it, and finding nothing will not content you, and so a thing will be found. I have kept houses full of other people's valuables since I was 16 years old, and never in 9 years was a spoon missed that I could not account for, and there is not a soul in this room who will trouble to learn it tonight. I know how this goes." She looked for the first time at Rosanna Kestrel, and there was neither heat nor hatred in it, only a clear and dreadful understanding. "You held it well. I will give you that. You marked the torn place hours ago and knew what use you would make of it, and you were patient, and patience is the whole art of cruelty. I do not know when the stone was slipped into my hem, or by whose hand, but it is there, is it not? You would not have brought us this far else. So let it be found. I am too tired to help you pretend to look." "You hear her," breathed Hester Westcott, half triumphant, half aghast. "She confesses it." "I confess nothing," said Rilla, and didn't raise her voice, "except that I know the country I am standing in. It is not the same country the Duke stands in. In his, a duke defends whom he pleases and is thought the finer for it. In mine, a girl in a torn gown is guilty from the moment a lady with a fan says softly that she wonders, and no diamond need ever be found in hem at all, though I dare say one will be, for you have gone to such trouble. I have known that country all my life. I only forgot it for an hour this evening." She did not look at Lorne as she said it. That was the mercy and the knife of it together. She would not shame him before them by looking, would not make his failure a public thing, would carry that too as she carried everything. "It was a pleasant hour," she said, "to no one, to the room, to the cooling candles. I am glad to have had it. It was worth the price of it, which I see I am now to pay." Someone had gone for a servant. The word constable moved through the crowd like a draught under a door. And a footman Lorne had known since the man was a boy stood white-faced and wretched at the edge of the ring, not knowing whether he was to lay hands upon a guest or a felon and praying to be told. The Dowager Marchioness had sunk into a chair and was looking from the naked claws at her throat to her nephew's frozen face with an expression Lorne could not bear to read, because it was not accusation and it was not triumph, it was pity. The pity of an old woman who had warned him and been right, and would have given her 3 dead husbands over again to have been wrong. Rosanna Kestrel had let her fan fall closed. She was not smiling, she was too skilled to smile, but her handsome face wore the smooth repose of a craftsman who has set the last stone in an arch and stepped back to watch it hold its own weight. It would hold, it was holding. In another minute they would find the diamond in the ruined hem, and there would be no unfinding it. And the girl would be led out of Ethermore between 2 men into the raw July dark, and her name would be finished before the dew was off the grass, and Lorne Duke of Ethermore, who could have stopped it with 3 yards and 1 word and had not, stood rooted upon the floor of his own house and felt the one clean thing in his life going out of the room without him, and could not, for the 8 dead years choking his throat, make his feet move or his mouth open to call it back. The fiddles had stopped. He had not noticed them stop. In the great gilded silence Rilla Westcott, quite calmly, and gathered up the torn hem of her gown in both hands, the wound in the cloth, held up now not to hide it but to offer it, and turned it out toward the room, so that they should not even have the small ugly pleasure of hunting for what they had hidden. "Here," she said, Save yourselves the trouble. It will be here. And the whole bright, cruel company leaned in as one to watch the plain, grey girl deliver up the proof of her own ruin, and Lorne shut his eyes once and knew that he had lost her, and that he had done it himself, and that all the wide world would call the cruel ones just. The diamond lay in the steward's open palm like a drop of frozen water, and the whole great ballroom of Ethermore had gone so silent that Lorne could hear the candles hiss. It had come out of the torn hem of the grey gown. Hester Westcott had drawn it forth herself. With a cry of horrified, pitched to carry to the farthest sconce, and now she held Rilla's wrist in her jewelled grip as though the girl might bolt, and turned her bromber back upon the county, so that every soul in the room might see the poor relation caught out at last. In her very skirts, Hester said, and her voice shook with a grief so beautifully counterfeited that a lesser man might have wept for her. The kestrel drop that dear Miss Kestrel wore into this house not 2 hours since. Oh, I have shelter a viper. I have fed her at my own table, and this is how she thanks a Christian roof. Lorne did not move. He stood where the accusation had frozen him, one hand on the back of a gilt chair, and for the space of 3 heartbeats the man who had governed 3 counties, without ever once being made a fool, could not command his own feet. The old poison had come up in him the instant the diamond flashed. Come up out of 8 buried years like damp through a wall. A rose garden in the spring of his 30th year, a woman weeping prettily upon his shoulder and swearing she wanted nothing in the world but him, and that same woman, an hour later, laughing to her cousin that Athermore's Park was the true jewel and the Duke merely the setting one endured to wear it. He had built the whole fortress of his life upon that laughter. And here was a girl in a ruined gown with a diamond in her hem, a girl he had stood with in the dark and very nearly loved, and the fortress whispered to him in its patient, venomous voice, "You see, you always see, in the end, they all come into your house wanting things." For one terrible moment the Duke of Athermore wavered, and was ashamed to his soul that he wavered, and did nothing. Then he looked at Rilla's face, because he had built his life upon the reading of faces, and it was the last honest instrument left to him, and what he read there stopped the poison cold. She was not looking at him. That was the whole of it, and it undid the fortress stone by stone in the space of a breath. The woman of 8 years ago had looked at him at every turn, measured every word against his wealth, wept toward him as one weeps toward a purse. But Rilla Westcott stood with her stepmother's hand clamped upon her wrist and the eyes of the county upon her like 100 small knives, and she did not once glance to the great Duke of Athermore to save her. She looked instead at the diamond in the steward's palm, and then at Hester, with a steadiness that had nothing of guilt in it and everything of a person taking the measure of a lie too large to answer, and she said, quite low, "I have never in my life held that jewel, ma'am. You know it. And I think you know a great deal more than that. Do you hear her?" Hester breathed to the room. "Brazen. Search her the more, I say. Turn out that wretched hem. There will be the clasp of it besides, tucked in the same place. I would stake my life she has hidden the clasp in the hem." And there it was. Lorne heard it the way a duellist hears the click of a pistol misfired, a small sound, and the whole world turning upon it. He let go the gilt chair, and something in the movement, some shift of the great banked authority he so seldom troubled to spend, drew every eye in the room to him at once, so that Hester's voice died in her throat. "The hem," said the Duke, and his voice was very quiet and very pleasant, which those who knew him best had long since learned to fear above any shout. "You are remarkably certain of the hem, madam." The steward drew one stone from a moment ago, in full view of us all, and found nothing beside. "Yet you would stake your life there is a clasp hidden there also." He came forward a slow pace, and the crowd parted from him like water. "How came you to know that, I wonder? For I have watched this whole sorry business unfold from where I stood, and I did not see you near enough to that gown to know what its hem contained. But you knew there was a stone in it before it was ever drawn. You told the room to search her before any hand had touched her skirts. A curious foreknowledge in a woman so lately and so loudly surprised. The amber face did not so much as flicker, and that steadiness was itself the confession, for an innocent woman flushes and stammers and casts about, and Hester Westcott had gone still as a stopped clock. But it was not to Hester that Lorne turned. He turned at his leisure to the corner where Rosanna Kestrel stood with a glass of untouched claret in her gloved hand, lovely and composed and patient, exactly as she had stood at the terrace window the night the whole of this had been decided behind those diamond-bright eyes. "Miss Kestrel," he said, "it is your diamond. Come and tell us how you lost it." She came. He would give her that. She had a beautiful nerve, and she crossed the parquet with the unhurried grace of a woman who has never once in her life been made to answer for anything, and she smiled at him. The small, brilliant, patient smile, and said, "I felt it gone from my throat above an hour since, your grace," and said nothing, not wishing to raise an alarm at your beautiful ball. And then to see it come from that girl's hem, you cannot think how it grieves me. I have no quarrel with Miss Westcott. I am only glad the thing is found. Above an hour, Lorne repeated. You felt a diamond leave your throat a full hour ago, and said nothing and raised no alarm, and yet you can name to the inch where in the whole of this house it was hidden. For it was you who whispered to Mrs. Westcott to search the hem. I saw your lips move at her ear not a minute before she cried out. An hour of silence, madam, and then such perfect knowledge. It will not do. You are mistaken, your grace, Rosanna said, and the smile held, but he saw it now, the flaw running through the porcelain fine as a hair. I am seldom mistaken about what I have seen with my own eyes, said the Duke, but I am a just man, and I will not hang a lady's name upon my eyes alone. So we will have the matter settled by those who cannot be mistaken. He raised his hand, no higher than his shoulder, and his understeward came forward from the wall, and behind him, brought up plainly, on some quiet word already given, for Lorne had not governed 3 counties by waiting upon events, came a frightened young housemaid in a starched cap, twisting her apron in both hands. "Speak up, Ailes," the Duke said, and his voice to the girl was gentler than any in that room had heard from him all season. "No harm will come to you here. You have only to say what you told Mr. Cargill in the passage. Whose maid came to the cloakroom this evening, and what did she carry?" The little maid's voice was a thread, but the silence was so total it filled the room to the cornices. "Miss Kestrel's own woman, your grace. She come to where the lady's wraps was laid by, and she had Miss Westcott's grey shawl over her arm, the torn grey, everyone knew it, and she was a long while at the hem of it with her back turned, and when I asked did she want help she was that sharp with me I went off. And after, your grace, I seen her give something back into Miss Kestrel's hand upon the stair, small and bright. I thought no more of it, being only a diamond, and the quality forever handing their jewels about. She stopped and went scarlet, and dropped a terrified curtsy to the whole appalled assembly, begging pardon. It was, Lorne thought, the most eloquent testimony he had heard in a court of any kind, precisely because the child had no notion she was giving it. He turned back to Rosanna Kestrel, and he'd not gloat, for he found no pleasure in it at all, only a cold and dreadful clarity. Your maid carried the grey shawl, he said. Your maid was a long while at its hem. Your maid gave you back the stone upon the stair, and then, an hour later, that same stone was discovered in a poor girl's gown by a woman who knew before the search precisely where to look. It is a neat piece of work, Miss Kestrel. I have seen coarser men transported for less. You reached into my house to ruin the one guest in it who never once asked me for a thing, and you did it, I do not doubt, believing I would thank you for the delivering of me from an unsuitable match. You mistook your man. I have spent 8 years being lied to by beautiful women. I have grown, at last, unfashionably fond of the truth. This is a servant's spite, Rosanna said, and her voice was still level, but had climbed a half-tone and could not climb back down. You would take the word of a scullery girl over mine. She has been coached. Someone has put her up to it, that creature, most likely, who has wormed her way so prettily into your grace's notice. She was brought up from the still room not a quarter hour ago, and has not been within 30 feet of Miss Westcott the whole evening, said Lorne without heat. No one coached her. She did not even understand what she carried until I drew it out of her before you all, and you may see as much writ plain on her frightened face, which is more than any of us can say for yours. You have overspent your credit, Miss Kestrel. There is not a soul in this room who believes you now, and I will not stand here and let you spend what little remains of your good name in slandering the one person present who has told nothing tonight but the truth. The mask did not shatter all at once. He watched it go by degrees, which was worse to see, the brilliant smile guttering like a snuffed taper, the lovely colour draining, the diamond-bright eyes flicking once wildly about the ring of faces that had crowded to admire her all season and now drew back from her in a slow appalled tide. She looked to Hester for rescue, and Hester Westcott had already loosed Rilla's wrist and taken a step away from her, the coward's instinct plain as print upon her face, disowning her ally before the county's judgment could fall on them both. There is no loyalty among those who have never loved anything, Lorne thought, and it was Rosanna Kestrel's turn now to stand alone in the middle of a bright floor while the whole room stared, and she found, as the girl in grey had never found, that she had no dignity to stand upon at all. "Your Grace, she began and could not finish, and into that silence his aunt's voice fell like a dropped fire-iron. "You may send for her carriage, Lorne," said Lady Ottoline Vane, Dowager Marchioness of Brede, sailing forward through the parting crowd in a thunderhead of black bombazine. "And for the Westcott carriage, besides, and I will see the whole caravan of them off your steps myself, for I have not enjoyed anything so much in a 12-month. She swept the amber woman her 2 blossoms with a single glance of magnificent contempt, and then, to Lorne's astonishment, she stopped before the girl in the ruined gown, and her voice changed altogether. "I dismissed you as the poor relation child in this man's gallery on the first night of the season, and I was a fool, and I am too old to pretend I was anything else. You have borne yourself this hour better than any duchess I have known, and I have known the lot of them." She took Rilla's cold hand in her own beringed one and pressed it hard. "There, that is more apology than I have made to any living soul since the Regency, and you are to treasure it." Lorne heard the room begin to breathe again, a rustle, a murmur, the small releasing sounds of 100 people who have watched a hanging turn at the last instant into a rescue. Footmen had appeared at the great doors. Hester Westcott was being borne toward them upon a rising tide of her own shrill protestations, her daughters white and stumbling in her wake, and Rosanna Kestrel walked out ahead of them all with her chin up and her ruin complete. And not one hand in that great glittering room reached to detain her or to comfort her, and the wide doors closed upon the 3 of them, and the county turned as one, slowly, wonderingly, back toward the girl in grey. And Lorne stood among his own guests in his own bright ballroom, and was not thinking of the humbling of his enemies at all. He was thinking of the 3 heartbeats in which he had wavered. That was the thing that had him by the throat now that the danger was past, not gratitude, not triumph, but a cold horror at himself so complete it near unmanned him. He had looked at her, at the truest heart that had ever come beneath his roof, and for the length of 3 beats of his own coward's blood, he had believed the diamond and not the woman. He had let the dead lotter of a garden 8 years gone very nearly cost him the one living thing that had unbuttoned the shell across his chest without his leave. She had stood there ringed with knives, and had not looked to him to save her, and he understood all at once and to the marrow why she had not, because she had asked him in the dark, on the terrace, to say the thing only if he meant it where it cost him something, and he had said he would. And then at the first testing of it he had stood at the back of the room with his hand on a chair and said nothing at all. He would carry that silence to his grave. He had asked her to keep to the wall and trust him with whatever came, and when it came he had left her to face it alone in the middle of the floor while he weighed her against a ghost. That she had survived it owed nothing to him and everything to the plain, unbending fact of what she was. He had contributed nothing to her rescue but the tardy machinery of his authority, set in motion a full minute after his heart should have moved. But he was not, by God, going to add a second silence to the first. The county was watching him. He knew precisely what they expected, that the Duke of Ethermore would murmur some correct cold word of regret, would have the poor wronged girl seen decently home, would do the seemly distant, ducal thing and thereby draw the whole scandal to a tidy close that touched him not at all. His aunt was watching him with her sharp old eyes narrowed to slits, waiting. Rilla stood beneath the great chandelier where they had left her, very straight, her torn hem showing at the side where she no longer troubled to hide it, and she was looking at him now at last. When it was safe to lose everything, she let herself look at him, with a face that expected nothing whatever, that had schooled itself in the long hard years of being overlooked to expect precisely nothing, and it was the expecting nothing that broke him wholly, and set him moving. He crossed the room. He crossed the whole shining length of it, past the dowager, past the massed and murmuring county, past the musicians who half rose in confusion at their empty gallery, and every step of it was watched, and he did not care that it was watched. He who had spent 8 years caring for nothing so much as that no one should see him want a thing. The murmur died before him. Someone gasped. He came to a halt before the girl in the ruined grey gown, while the whole of Athamore held its breath around them like a held note, and he bowed to her. Not the small correct inclination he gave the county, but the deep bow he gave to equals and to no one below his rank, the bow he had given her once already in the dark where no one could see, and gave her now in the full blaze of the candles where everyone could. "Miss Westcott," said the Duke of Athamore, and his voice was not quite steady, and he let it not be steady, before them all. "The musicians have been kept waiting a shameful while, and the first dance of my ball is not yet begun, and I find I have kept it, though I did not know until this hour that I was keeping it for you." He straightened and held out his hand to her, open, across the small bright space that was all that was left between them now. "Will you do me the very great honour?" For the length of one breath she did not move, and Lorne, Duke of Athamore, stood with his hand open before the whole of his own house, and discovered that he could bear anything the county might do to him except this, the small terrible possibility that she had learned her lesson too well, that the 8 hard years of being overlooked had taught her to refuse a thing before it could be taken from her, and that she would look at his open palm and see only one more handsome person in a soft voice offering a warmth she could not afford to believe. He did not lower his hand. He would have held it there until the candles guttered, and the last guest had gone home to spread the tale of the Duke who stood all night with his arm out to a girl in a torn gown and was refused. He found, to his own astonishment, that he would rather be that man in every drawing-room in 3 counties than be the man he had been an hour ago, safe behind his shell with his hand upon a chair. Then Rilla Westcott put a hand in his. She did it plainly, without flourish, the way she did everything, and her fingers were cold and perfectly steady, and the moment they closed upon his own something went through him that was not triumph, and was not relief, but was very near to the thing men mean when they say they have come home. He closed his hand about hers as though it were the one solid object in a pitching sea. Over her head he found the gallery and the frozen musicians and lifted his free hand to them, one small imperious motion, and said not loudly, but in the voice that had commanded that house and that county and that name for half his life, and had never once until this night been used in the service of anything he loved, the first dance. There was an instant in which nothing happened, in which the whole gilded room seemed to totter on the edge of the impossible, and then the first violin, being a good man and an Athamore servant to bone, set his bow to the string and began, and the others came stumbling, and then surely after him, and the great abandoned floor of the ball lay open and shining before them, and the Duke of Athamore led the girl in the ruined grey gown out into the very centre of it, alone, before them all, and turned, and set his hand at her waist, and began to dance. He felt the room breaking around him like ice on a river in the thaw. He did not look at it. He looked at her. He had not danced in 8 years, had stood at the edge of 100 such floors, with a glass of wine he did not drink, and a face like a shut door. And he found that his feet had not forgotten it, that some patient animal part of him had kept the knowledge all that while against exactly this hour, and that she danced the way she bore everything, lightly and truly, following him without surrender, her chin level and her eyes on his, and that the torn hem of her gown swung out as they turned, and no one in that room would ever again in their lives dare to name it in her hearing. "You are trembling, your grace," she said very low, so that it went no further than the small warm distance between them. "It is I who am meant to tremble. It is in all the books. I have never," he said, "in the whole of my life, been so frightened as I was in the moment before you took my hand." He turned her, and the candles wheeled gold behind her head. "I have faced men across pistols with a steadier pulse. I stood at the back of my own room, Rilla, with the truest thing that ever came beneath this ringed round with knives, and I did nothing, because 8 years ago a woman I meant to marry kept another man's letters in her glove and laughed at me in a garden with him after. And I built a house of cold about myself, so that it could never be done to me again, and tonight I hid inside it while they very nearly destroyed you. There is no apology in the language equal to it. I will not insult you, the small one. I only tell you what I did, because you of all women alive will not let me pretend I did not do it, and because I would rather stand condemned in the truth with you than acquitted in a lie with anyone else. She was silent a moment, moving with him, and he felt rather than saw the thing pass over her, not soften exactly. She was too clear-eyed a creature to be melted by a fine speech, and he loved her the more for it, that even now, even here, she weighed him. You did do it, she said at last, and there was no cruelty in it and no absolution in it either, only the plain honest scale she carried everywhere. You stood at the back of the room. I felt you there, not coming. I will not tell you it did not cut, for it cut worse than anything Miss Kestrel had ready in her clever hands, because from her I expected it and from you I had begun, God help me, not to. Her fingers tightened, only slightly upon his. But you crossed the room, Lorne. In the end, when there was nothing in it for you but the whole county's whisper and a torn gown on your arm, you crossed it. Any man will do the seemly thing when it is easy. You did the unseemly one when it was hard, and before all of them, and that I will weigh and weigh heavily on the side of you. Why it however you must, he said, only do not stop wedding me. That is all I ask. The women who smiled at me for 8 years wanted my name and my houses and my 10,000 a year, and they weighed nothing and asked nothing, and I could have married any of them and gone to my grave a comfortable, frozen, well-served man. You have never once flattered me. You told me on that terrace that you had learned to warm yourself at fine promises and never to believe them. I stand here in front of my whole world asking you to believe one. They turned again, and he brought them, by a degree closer than the dance strictly required, and no power on earth could have made him care. Not the promise of the rank. Not the rescue. I know you too well to offer you rescue. You would sooner walk to the north country in the rain than be any man's charity. The promise of the man. Whatever is left of him after 8 wasted years. It is not much, it is entirely yours. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he had known her the careful God was gone out of her face altogether, and what stood behind it undid him more completely than any weeping woman ever had, for it was not weeping. It was a grave, astonished tenderness. The look of a person who has spent her whole life being overlooked and has stopped, somewhere in the hard years, even hoping to be seen, and is being seen now, wholly, in the full blaze of 1,000 candles, by the one man in the kingdom she would have chosen and never once let herself imagine. I want the man, she said. I never wanted the other. You may keep your houses and your 10,000 a year. I have been perfectly poor, and I know exactly how little they weigh against one person who does not lie to you. If you were plain Mr. Lorne with a curate's living and a leaking roof, I should want you precisely as much, and be spared the bother of all these people staring. It is you I am dancing with. It was always going to be only ever you. He could not answer her at once. He turned her through the last figure of the dance in a silence more full than any speech, and the violins came down at last to their soft close, and the two of them stood still in the centre of the great bright floor with the whole county massed and silent around them. And the Duke of Athermore lifted the hand he still held and bowed over it, and pressed his mouth to her cold fingers, slowly, deliberately, before every eye in that room, and thereby said, without a word, in the one language his world could not misread, the thing he had come 8 years and half his life unable to say to anyone. The room let out its held breath in a single long sigh, and after the sigh came the murmur, and the murmur was not the murmur that had circled her all evening like wasps. It had turned, the whole vast fickle weight of it. The way such rooms always turn, toward the sun once they have seen where the sun means to shine. Ladies who had drawn their skirts aside from a torn grey hem an hour since were now recollecting, aloud and warmly, that they had remarked at once upon the youngest Miss Westcott's uncommon composure. It was contemptible, and it was exactly what he had counted upon, and he watched it break over Rilla like a wave, and watched her meet it with the same level chin she had brought to their cruelty, neither fooled nor flattered. And he thought that he would spend the rest of his life protecting that clear, unpurchasable steadiness from the world that was even now scrambling to buy it. He did not let go of her hand. He turned, with her hand in his, to face the place where Rosanna Kestrel stood. She had not fled. She was far too proud and far too skilled to give them the spectacle of flight. She stood where the reckoning had left her, very handsome and very still, and only the 2 spots of colour burning high on her cheekbones betrayed that she understood what had happened to her. That in a single hour she had spent the whole capital of a reputation 10 years in the building, and would not see a farthing of it again. His aunt's diamond had been found not in Rilla's hem, but folded in Rosanna's own reticule, where a clumsier accomplice than she deserved had left it. The county had seen it drawn out. There was no unfinding it, and no lady in that room would receive her after tonight who did not wish to be thought a fool. Miss Kestrel, said the Duke, and though he did not raise his voice the whole room heard it, for the whole room had gone silent to listen. You will make your farewells to no one. My people will bring your carriage. You are not again received at Athermore, nor, I think, when this evening is told over, and it will be told, Miss Kestrel, at every table in the 3 counties by Friday, anywhere else that signifies. You came into my house to break a woman worth 100 of you because she was poor and could not answer you, and you have instead broken yourself upon her, and I find I have not one word of pity to waste on it. He paused, and his voice, when it came again, was almost gentle, which was worse. You wondered aloud, this evening, what sort of a girl comes to a duke's ball in a ruined gown. I will tell you. The sort a duke marries. The word went through the room like a struck bell. He felt Rilla go still beside him. He had not asked her yet, not in words, not properly. He had done it backward, before the county, the way a drowning man does everything backward, and he turned to her at once, there in the ringing hush, and lowered his voice again to the small warm distance that was theirs. I have shamed you into it in front of 500 people, he murmured, which is precisely the graceless, high-handed, ducal thing you have every right to despise in me, and I will unsay it this instant, and ask you properly on my knees in an empty room tomorrow if you would rather. Only, and here the Duke of Athermore, who had faced the county all night without a tremor, found his steadiness desert him utterly, only say you will have me, Rilla, not the rank, me, and Rilla Westcott in her torn grey gown, in the centre of the floor where they had meant to see her disgraced, looked up at him and let the whole bright company see her smile at last, the real one, the one he had glimpsed once behind a pillar and hungered for ever since, and said, so that only he could hear it, I have been saying it since the terrace, your grace. You are only now catching up. Across the room he saw Hester Westcott's handsome painted face collapse from its triumph into a ruin of calculation. Saw the woman who had dressed her own 2 daughters like dragoons and drilled them at him all season, and sent her stepdaughter into his ball in a torn hem to be laughed out of it. Saw her understand, in one dreadful instant, that the very cruelty she had contrived to sink the girl had lifted her instead clean over all their heads and into a place from which she might, if she were vengeful, ruin the lot of them with a word. Cordelia stood white and stricken beside her mother. Prudence had begun, uselessly, to cry. And Lorne, who an hour ago would have turned them out of his gates into the July dark without a backward glance, felt Rilla's hand tighten in his and understood, before she said a word, that she would not have it. They are still my sisters, she said quietly, reading him as she always read him. Cordelia most of all was more frightened than cruel at the end. I saw it. I will not begin my new life by handing out the same coin they dealt me. Let them go home tonight and think on what they did, and let there be a place for Cordelia, some day, if she should ever wish to earn one. That is not weakness, Lorne. It is only that I have been on the cold side of that door, and I would not shut it on another soul while I have the warm side to give. He looked at her a long moment, and he thought, not for the first time that night, but most completely, that he was in the presence of a finer creature than himself, and that the great labour and privilege of the years he had left would be to deserve, a little, the extraordinary thing that had just consented to stand beside him. His aunt reached them then, the Dowager Marchioness of Brede. Black bombazine rustling, sharp old eyes suspiciously bright, and she took Rilla's free hand in both of hers and held it, and looked her over from her plain dressed hair to a ruined hem with the frank appraising stare of 80 years, and found, plainly, that it suited her. 8 years I have told him, she said to Rilla, that he was throwing his one life away for the memory of a girl who was not worth the letters she kept in her glove. He would not hear me. And then you came behind a pillar in a torn gown wanting nothing from him at all, and he heard you across a whole ballroom without a single word being spoke. She patted the cold hand between her own. I am a hard old woman, child, and I have buried 3 husbands, and I do not weep at weddings, and I give you fair warning I mean to weep like a fountain at yours. He is a great deal of trouble. He is worth every ounce of it. Mind you tell him so on the days he forgets. They were married before the leaves turned, in the small grey church on the Athmore land, with the county there in its finest and Cordelia Westcott, pale and grave and forgiven, standing where a sister should, and it was said afterward, by those who had been at the great ball and told the tale ever after as though they had championed her all along, that the strangest thing was not that the feared cold Duke of Athermore had married a portionless girl in a torn gown. Great houses had swallowed stranger matches. But the change that came upon the man himself, who had been a shut door for 8 years and was, of a sudden, a house with every window lit. For the Duke of Athermore, who had built his whole life so that no living soul should ever see him want a thing, was seen now, by everyone, to want exactly one, was seen to turn toward his Duchess when she entered a room the way a plant turns toward the light, without knowing he did it, was seen to keep the first dance of every ball he gave for the rest of his life for her, and for no one else, and to bow over her hand each time as deeply and as gravely as he had that first blazing night, as though he could not quite believe, even years on, even with the children asleep upstairs and the grey coming into his hair, that she had crossed no room to reach him at all, that he had crossed it, that his cold coward's feet had carried him at the last across the whole shining length of his life to the one warm true heart the whole world had overlooked, and that she had put her hand in his, and had kept it there, and meant to keep it there until the candles guttered and long, long after.